We're going to be starting in 5 minutes. Hey, Alicia. Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. 2 minutes, really. If you're in the room right now, you can click those two little lines and you can share that with the world. All right, guys, how are you? Give me 1 more minute. I'm just broadcasting, and of course, everything is not working like it's supposed to because Mercury is messing with me. Got a little polka. All righty, guys. Alrighty. Welcome to another YNS live show. I am so sorry that took a little bit there. You know, Mercury is messing with me in all aspects of life these days. I cannot wait to introduce you guys to my guest, Fran Racioppi, who, wait until you hear this story because it is, as he looks like a very young person. He's had a lot of life. So welcome, Fran. How are you?
Did you call me old?
No, I said you look very young. I said you don't. The amount of life that you have lived, though. I mean, you would think. Wait to get into this that you are an older person, and you are not. So welcome to YNS.
I feel it every day. It's okay.
I'm sure. So before we start, anyone that has joined the room, hello, Gina, Dave, Alicia, thank you. I know there's people listening to us right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Welcome, wherever you're listening to. You guys are in for a very special treat. But first, I want to talk about who this is sponsored by. So have you ever been listening to your favorite podcast and all of a sudden there's the moment that you're like, wait a second, I want to share this. Well, now you can, and you can do that with an app called Picked Cherries. It is so awesome. You can literally be listening. It's just like an Apple Spotify, but as you're listening to the podcast, that little moment comes on and you're like, okay, wait, I want to share this. You grab that Picked Cherry and then you can send it to all of your friends. You can send it to your family. You can send it to social media. So your friends and family can actually listen to that little piece. Which, I mean, how many times have you guys been listening to a podcast and you want to send it and then you send it to your friend or your sister or your brother? You're like, you have to listen to this. But maybe it's an hour and they're like, yeah, I don't have time. But now you can send that little snippet that's going to get them hooked, just like an IG or a TikTok. And then they can share that and you can get more people listening to your podcast. So again, that is Picked Cherries. You can get that in Apple, iOS, and you can also get that for Android. So Fran, okay, we got a lot to talk about. I want to touch on really quickly. Fran and I both are going to be at PodFest in Orlando Thursday this week, and we're both speaking, which is really excited. I've been on the Jedberg podcast that Fran hosts, and we had so much fun. He actually came to West Hampton, and we did a live show, which was awesome. And Fran kind of reached out to me and said, hey, I have this idea. Would you want to do a collab with me when we're at PodFest. And as you get into this episode, you're going to see why we really mesh really well, but also why I'm so inspired by Fran, everything that he does and everything that he has done in his life to really get him to different paths in his life that he has followed passions. So we're going to be doing that at PodFest. We are going to also both be putting those episodes out. So we're going to be interviewing a couple of different people that are there, which is going to be really exciting. So we're going to get into this. Fran, did you want to add anything to that long spiel that I just threw out there?
Yeah, I'm super pumped. So I was really fortunate to get to meet Juliet a couple months ago now, and we had her on episode 53, and I went to West Hampton. I took my daughter. She was my production coordinator for the day, and I don't know if I told you this, but she took 453 pictures that day. Yeah. And if you remember, she had been kind of like slunched down in the chair and was like totally just kind of like hitting the button. About 6 were usable. And so we had a long conversation about actually caring about what you're doing for a few minutes when you're asked to help out. But no, I'm super excited. The episode that we did really well. I loved the conversation with you, where you were coming from, your perspective on things, where you're going with your podcast and that direction. And when the PodFest opportunity came up, I said, look, I really love doing these live events because we had just done a big one down in Jacksonville, and I wanted to incorporate a co-host, and I thought of no one better than you, and I think it's going to be an awesome collaboration. So everybody needs to wait and check it out.
Yes, and thank you so much. And really, this is one of the things I love about Fireside is the interaction. I'm really excited about it too. And when you said that, I think I was in the car with my husband and I was like, oh my God. I'm like, remember? And he always laughs because I'm like, remember the guy that used to be the Green Beret? And I give him like all your thing. And he's like, yes, the Jedburgh podcast. And I'm like, yes, we're going to do a collab at PodFest, which is going to be really awesome. But you and I even talked about as we both grow, because we both are really growing with our space, because we really have found what we're meant to do, doing more collabs. So I want to start this. I first want you to just, and my listeners know, kind of just touch on where you grew up, a little bit of your background, where you went to school, and then we can, really get into this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody knows me mostly being from Boston, but I was actually born in Rhode Island. And so that was a big part of my life. Lived there for the first 10 years, moved to Florida for a little bit. And then when we moved back, when I was about 15, we actually moved to Boston, and outside of the city, lived in a town called Weston. I went to Boston University for undergrad. Behind me, up above my head, is my oar from being on the Boston University men's rowing team. So I was a four-year rower there, and which also meant that I did not do ROTC. And so everyone says, did you do ROTC? Did you go to West Point? No, I went to Boston University, and I was a college athlete, and I never thought about really going into the Army. And then I had wanted to be a journalist. Tom Brokaw was my hero. I looked at him, I watched him every night, and I said, that's my dream job. That's what I want to do. And 9/11 was my junior year. And so then I said, well, I'm going to be a war correspondent. Like, this is crazy. I can go out there. I can cover these war zones. And then I've talked about it a little bit before, but then I watched Geraldo Rivera out, and I don't remember if it was in Iraq or Afghanistan, but he was with an infantry platoon, and they actually got in a firefight, and he pulled out a pistol, and he started running down the road with this pistol, and he fell, and he dropped it, and all these guys in the infantry squad start yelling at him, and they're like, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't have a gun. Why would you do that? And I looked at that, and I said, nope. Never going to do it.
And I remember that
guy.
Yeah.
Do you really?
I totally remember that because I was in the city at 9/11. I lived in the city. And I remember, because I always wanted to, like, journalism always was really, something that fascinated me as well. And I remember thinking, oh, what a moron. I felt bad. But it was like one of those moments that you're like, holy crap, why are you there? You should not be there. They should have people that should be. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so it's actually one of my goals, and I throw it out there because I'm waiting for the person to be like, I can make that happen. I want to interview Geraldo Rivera. I want to tell him this story because he changed my life. He really did.
Right, which
Tom
I love.
Brokaw, Geraldo Rivera changed my life. and then I said, no, I'm going to go do this thing. And by that time, I had watched the special forces had in my mind saved the world after 9/11, going into Afghanistan and defeating the Taliban and combating Al Qaeda. And I said, well, that right there is what I want to do. Those guys have beards, they have long hair, they're riding horses. That looks crazy. And I joined the Army and went to officer candidate school with the goal of eventually becoming a Green Beret and serving in the special forces, which I was fortunate enough to do, and spent 13 years in the military.
So again, like when I think about this, I was in the city in 9/11, you were your junior year, and you spent 13 years in the special forces. And I know I've listened to a number of podcasts that you either have been on or, on your podcast talked about. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating, and I always love to bring this back to athletes, because I really do think when you're a college athlete, there's something kind of embedded in you. And it's really that workhorse. It's like that work ethic, but also with the military. I mean, you have to be someone that's like, okay, I'm kind of balls to the walls. Like, you can't just be someone that's like, yeah, let me just try this out. I mean, you're a Green Beret. And in my mind, that's like the coolest thing. I mean, my dad was in the military. I told my dad actually that I was going to, they're dry. I wonder if is this my dad? Hold on one second. This might even be no, it's not. My dad was going to possibly, there's a Mark with the C in the audience. Hello, Mark. And then my dad has that Mark with the C, and they were going to try to listen because he was like, oh my gosh, he heard our podcast together and said, this is really fascinating. My dad was in Vietnam and was wounded early on. So I have, and my grandfather was in the Army, not my dad's dad, but my mom's dad. And so I have just such a respect for what you guys do. And so when you said, I'm going into the Army, what did your parents, your siblings, like, what was the kind of thought behind that?
Yeah, well, first, Mark, your dad, thank you for your service. It's really, really important. I mean, that generation of not only the Vietnam veterans, but the Korea veterans and World War II, and everybody who served, set the conditions for what really I truly believe has made this country the greatest country in the world. And we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to everybody who served, before, with, and after me. So I really do appreciate that.
Thank you.
What did everybody say? What are you, crazy? My dad said you need to go to the Air Force because you don't do anything. So no offense. If the Air Force people they'll come after me after that. But they do stuff. They do stuff. It's just different. They're really important. They've saved me a lot of times. But that was my dad's perspective. My mom didn't really want to talk about it. My wife, now we've been together since we were in college, and I just didn't tell her. I just went and did it, and she thought I was going to move to Bangor, Maine, and become a weatherman or something up there.
Right.
Then came back one day.
So that had to have been shocking for her, though, to be like, "Wait, what did you do?" Like,
yeah, she in retrospect, she probably looks back now and she's like, well, that I should have known back then that once you get these ideas in your head, you're just going to run with it. So I might as well support it, which is what she's pretty much done ever since. And I couldn't be more appreciative of that. Certainly been for over 20 years now. One of my biggest supporter in every crazy idea that I've ever had. But yeah, she supported it, and I'll say, you brought up athletics. I would never have been able to achieve success in the Army and going to Ranger School and graduating Ranger School and becoming a Green Beret and passing selection and making it through all that if I had never been rowing in college. Like, I honestly do believe that set the foundation for absolutely everything that I was able to achieve in my life, personally and professionally, because the work ethic that is instilled in you. And I played high school sports. I was on the football team. I played lacrosse, and I had worked hard, but I had never understood what hard work really was until you compete at a Division I collegiate level in a sport like rowing, where I truly there is no other sport that takes you from nothing, resting heart rate, to complete lactic acid, meltdown in a matter of 5.5 to 6 minutes. And that sport does that. And not only does it require an extreme individual effort, but it requires a team effort as well in terms of physical capability and technical capability. And when you take those components and then you say, well, how were you successful in special forces? The answer is really simple. Like when I was in college, I had to be number one. I had to be technically and physically competent as an individual. And then I had to do that with 8 other people in a boat. And I'm saying 8 people will say there's only 8 people in a boat. No, there's a coxswain. So you have to work with them too. So 9
Right.
people in this boat, and everybody has to work together, and it's precision. It's technically proficient. And at the point at which you believe you don't have anything left, well, that point in time has to get earlier and earlier in order to compete at the highest level and win. And what I mean by that is you can't wait for the last 500 meters of the race. You need to go from the start. And that really teaches you what it takes to win.
Right. And that's, I mean, when I learned that about you, I was like, oh, that makes sense that you have that background, that you played sports. And, um, again, I played in college. I didn't play at the Division 1 level, but I played 2 sports. And so it was one of those things that, I had constantly, you have to have that in mind, but it's not only yourself, it's your team. And so, I played field hockey and lacrosse, which is different in, with rowing. Rowing is one of those like gymnastics. There's certain like sports that in my own head, and it might not be true in the world, but in my own head, gymnastics, rowing, and a couple other that I'm always like, what, that is like, you are in it and you have to be so, not just your physical, but you also have to be in your mind, right? It can't just be your physical. And my kids and I talk about this a lot. And I think you and I touched on this before, but there is something with talent versus working and worth ethic versus talent. And my kids and I talk about it, that like you could be the most natural athletic, but you don't work as hard. And my sister and I was probably more naturally athletic than her, but she worked her ass off all year round. I was like, I took some time, but then the second we got into season is when I really worked my ass off. And as we grew, she probably became a little bit of a better athlete because of that. Like she never let up, where I would some days like, I don't feel like running the 5 miles. I'm going to take, the cheat route, which I don't like to admit, but I would go and hide behind a tree with like 3 of my other teammates. And then we would pop out and be like, woohoo. I did not do that all the time. Don't think that, but it was just something different. Like when I swam, I sometimes would swim under the lanes. Like it's just me. Anyone that's listening is like, oh, okay, I get it. But so what do you think there with that like natural athleticism versus the worth ethic? And then, when that's combined with one person, that's when you get that like 1%, like, just crazy athlete. But you don't have to be a crazy athlete all the time to be the top of your game if you have that worth ethic. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, it depends on what's your goal. So, I
I
mean,
love that.
it's really what's your goal? I mean, you started with it, but I mean, I'm 41 now, and like, I'm not a Division 1 college athlete. I'm not a Green Beret, serving an active duty Green Beret anymore. Like what I'm not competing in obstacle course racing and running, Spartan races. I'm covering them now, from the podcast perspective, and
Right.
I'm kind of dabbling and messing around. But my goal right now is to just be, is to be physically fit as best that I can be. And so that I don't want to ever be limited by my physical capability. And you'll hear a lot of professional athletes talk about that in their second phase after, what are they trying to do when they stop competing? And that's very much how I feel. I want to be able to play lacrosse with my daughter without my knees hurting. I want to be able to chase
Yes.
my son around. I want to be, he's only 2. And so he's got a long way to go. And so I don't want to, I want to be able to play with him in 10 and 20 years and not be limited physically. So that's my goal right now. If your goal is to compete at a professional level and be competitive, what I say is that your raw ability is going to run out. You're going to eventually get to the point where everybody has raw ability. So I also work as the performance development coach at Boston University with the men's rowing team. And so I talk to the team and the coaches and the athletic staff on the emotional and mental side of the sport and how that affects training and competition. And one of the biggest factors and things that I speak to them about, especially at the later part of the season, is everybody's put the work in. Everybody has earned the right to get to the starting line. But now the difference is the guys who did not what was asked of them, but what was
Right.
required to win. And that
Yes.
is a big difference. Okay. And I interviewed anybody who's really interested in this topic, and I'll put a shameless plug in here. Anyone
No,
who's
please
really interested in
do.
this topic should listen to the Jedberg podcast, episode 60. It came out last week. We're promoting it right now on all of our social media. But episode 60 was with Josh Bridges. Josh Bridges was a Navy SEAL. He was a loan officer who never heard about what a Navy SEAL was. Didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. Some guy was like, you should start doing CrossFit and you should become a Navy SEAL. And he was like, I don't know what either of those two things are, but let me check them out. Next thing you know is he's a Navy SEAL. And then he becomes one of CrossFit's biggest and most famous athletes. He just recently retired, and now he founded a coffee company called Good Dudes Coffee. But what he talks about is our whole conversation is about this, is that you think you're working hard until you walk out and you turn around and there's guys going back in.
Right.
And that's Peyton Manning, Tom Brady. That's the teams that are consistently have it in their mind. And Josh says this, that everybody thinks they work hard. Winners think they never did enough.
Right.
And that's what he talks about, keeping him up at night. And that's the attitude that you have to have is did I do enough? What else is there? What haven't I done? What do I need to be doing right now to better myself? And this doesn't only apply to athletics. If you think about, I did an episode 38 with his name's Harris Glazer. He owns a company called Midnight Express. They make, if you know what Midnight Express is, if you're into boats, you probably know what it is, but they make the $1 million power boats down in South Florida. And he says the entrepreneur, it's the first thing they think about when they wake up, and it's the last thing they think about when they go to bed. And it's constantly, what haven't I done? What haven't I done? Yep. And it beats you up inside. In order to close that 1%, it's not what has been asked of you. It's identifying what's required to win. And are you willing to make that commitment? If you are, you'll be a champion. You'll be the most successful. If you're not, that's fine too. That may be all you might just want to be in the game. If being in the game is good enough for you, that's great. If you want to win, you have to find what that gap is, and you have to close that gap.
I love that. And you guys, you can hear, and this is where it's exciting to hear. So you heard that Fran was a Green Beret. He rode in Boston, and you can hear how excited he just got talking about his podcast. And this is where I want to kind of take this like a little pivot. But you, for 13 years, you were in the Green Beret. Tell us, because I know you were stationed in Africa for a while, and that was towards the end. And you said you met your wife in college and you joined the Army with her not really completely realizing when you guys were dating. Where did that lead you? And then how did you kind of decide, okay, it's time for me to exit the Army? And then tell us that little story, because I remember listening to that a little bit, touching on, okay, I need to now get like a job. What do I do? Yeah. And take us through that path a little bit, please.
Sure. Yeah. So, I joined the Army 2 months after we graduated college, and went straight to basic training. The war in Iraq had started, went to my year and a half of basic training, or initial training, went to my unit as an infantry platoon leader, went to Iraq for a year, 2005, 2006, and then came back, made the jump to Special Forces, and then served in Special Forces until I got out in 2016. Went to Iraq 2 more times as a Special Forces detachment commander. I also served in a variety of different operations officer roles in running 18 teams and then an entire group. And I was my last job, I was the aide to the 2-star general who commanded all special operations in Africa. And so I spent about 2 years in and out of Africa. I lived on the continent for 6 months as well in East Africa. And so when I got out, and I've talked about this before, I had not been home in years. And the last time that my wife and I had been, really together was in college, and, we grew apart, and our relationship and our marriage suffered tremendously because of it. And we spent about 6 years separated, actually. And that, so I got out when her and my daughter moved to New York and said, if this is what you want to do, then you're going to pursue it. But we don't, we have other things that we want to do in life. I had to make the decision of, did I want to continue to pursue this, or did I want to try to, repair a family and make that work? And so I followed to New York. I went to NYU. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Actually, I was completely confused, and I had applied to hundreds of jobs at every company that you could think of, and I had not gotten very many offers or any, and there was a knowledge gap. You had a lot of soft skills, a lot of leadership, but leadership, and I give a lot of talks on leadership, and I work with a lot of groups, and I say, leadership, everybody has a different definition of leadership, and so it's difficult to quantify that. What you can quantify are things like, do you know how to read a balance sheet? Do you know what a P&L is? Do you know how to create a marketing strategy? And unfortunately, when all of your answers are, what is that? I've never heard of that. You don't get a whole lot of jobs when you come out of the military. So I identified that the military trains you, and every time you get promoted, every time you take a new job, they send you to a school. And I looked at getting out of the military very much the same way. And I said, well, I need to close a knowledge gap, and I probably need to go get an MBA. And so I applied to NYU. I got in, and then I went and there for 2 years while I lived in New York. And we lived separate, actually. And so I wasn't like, I went to New York and we just figured it all out and our family was back together. It took another 4 or 5 years to really work through that, as I went through my journey of being not in the military. And the only last thing I had known was being 13 years in the past, and being a college kid. And right. So, what do you do when you leave one college, and essentially the next time you have freedom is you're another college student? You end up acting like a college student. And so, right. So I did that and made a series of other, choices. We can argue were they poor or not at this point. It's certainly there in retrospect. But the good thing is put a lot of work in over the last couple of years. Got our family back together. We had our son, who's now 2, and now it has been a really, really exciting time. And she'll kill me for saying this, but we're having another so in October. But don't tell her.
Oh, amazing. Well, so this is that, and thank you for sharing that, because I know that's not always easy to talk about, where you lacked, right? You did all these things. And what year did you guys get married? Did you get married right out of college?
In 2005. So I got out of college in 2003. So we got married in 2005, right before I went to Iraq.
Right before you went to Iraq. Yeah. And can you take us a little bit into what was the mindset of, okay, we need to get married before I go overseas? Was it because you wanted to not lose that? I'm very curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'd been together, on and off, even in college. You always break, everybody who has, right. You always break up for a couple of months here and there and come back. It's right. The way it is. I don't know. We've been together for a long time, for 5, 6 years at that point, and it was like, hey, I'm going to Iraq for a year, and if we're obviously we see a future, and we've made it this far. And she had moved down to Georgia where I'd been training, and then we moved to Colorado, and we owned a house together, and it was the natural progression of, well, let's get married, and if we don't do it now, we're not doing it for a year, because that's when I get back. So, right. So that was really the driver decision.
Right. No, and I appreciate that. Because one of the things that I always find, what I always say on my podcast, and I believe it in life, that we all have paths, whether you believe in God, whether you believe in the universe, we all have paths, and we meet people on those paths that are meant to be with us. And either those people bring you up or they bring you down. And it's a choice to make what path you're going to stay with, or, what people you're going to stay with. So obviously you guys really brought each other up. I met your daughter. She's wonderful. Even though she didn't take great pictures, she was she was really, she jumped in and was like, here, Dad, I'm happy to help. We need to say, what is she, 13 or 14?
Yeah, 12.
Oh, 12. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can't blame her.
Yeah, totally. She thought she was doing a great job. Because I have all those ages right there. So, there's something about that. You're loyal, that says to you, you're a loyal person. Obviously your wife is too. And you guys knew, okay, let's grow with each other. And the fact that you decided, okay, after 13 years being in the military, I don't want this part to go. This is my heart. This is where I felt. Now that had to be tremendously difficult. I mean, I can't even imagine having to choose, being like, okay, because from what I read and what you have said, you loved being you loved being a Green Beret.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely did. Absolutely. Yeah, it was great. It was it wasn't certainly was not a lifelong. It wasn't like I was a little kid and was like, I'm always going to do this, but I was pretty good at it. And I really enjoyed traveling, and I loved making an impact. What matters to me is making an impact. It still does. And
Yes.
so you can do that in a variety of different ways. And so it's about how do you choose to make an impact. But yeah, every once in a while, I talk to my buddies who are still in, and they only have a year or two, and then they're retiring because they'll hit their 20 years. So that's kind of crazy.
Right. Right.
Because I think about all my peers. It's like, oh, I could be retired in 2 years. But then I'm like, you'll never retire. And so I look at it now, and it's like, well, where would I be though? I think that if you look at your military career and the trajectory, it's pretty defined. You generally know by the time you've hit that 10-year mark, if you're being assessed and groomed for future levels of command, or if you're going to be in a staff role, or what you're going to do for the rest of your career. So you generally know. The exciting thing, certainly have a lot of opportunities that will come your way that you can't predict, and there's a lot of great things that you can do. When you get out, though, you kind of got to start figuring it out, and there's excitement in having to solve that problem, and that's going to change a multitude of different ways. I think as you grow and evolve, and as you define who and what you want to be. I think if I look a year or two down the road and I say, put myself in that position, and I'll be in that position, and I'll say, am I better today having gotten out, or would I have been better if I had stayed in? Certainly, those paths would been very different, but I think that I'll be very confident and excited about where I am, having experienced all the things that I did from 2016 to 2023.
Right. And I have to say, I mean, just knowing you a little bit, I feel like know you enough that whatever you do, you really put your heart and soul in. So I feel like once you made that decision, and correct me if I'm wrong, but once you made that decision, like, okay, no, I'm going to save my family. That's what I want to do. I want to be with my wife and my daughter. And I can say, okay, I impacted a lot of people in this part of my Green Beret career. And now I want to make a difference here and find out what's next for me. Do you think, and I guess my question is, do you go back and ever regret, or what I picture as you is you're like, okay, that was great. Now I'm on to the next thing. And now I'm on to making an impact in this part of my life.
I think you got to be on to the next.
Yeah.
I don't think it gets you anywhere. And the times have changed too. I mean,
Right.
what we were doing during my time in is much different. I mean, this was the height of Afghanistan, Iraq, and the global war on terror. And what's going, what the mission is right now is vastly different than what it was when I'm there. And so, I don't know if looking back in that manner is helpful.
I totally
I
agree.
think you got to focus on what's next and where you want to be, and what's the next chapter look like. And I think that's what I've tried to really focus on.
Yes, and you can see it because now we're going to get into to this chapter. So you went to get your MBA, and again, thank you for sharing all of that because I know that's not always easy. But so you got your MBA, and I know there was something that I read. You actually missed the deadline, and you called up and were like, "Okay, oh come on, you got to throw me a bone." Can you tell us that a little bit?
Yeah, I missed the deadline for application for NYU, and then I just called and asked if I could apply, and I didn't give them a chance to speak. I called the head of the admissions department, and I just they picked up the phone, and I said, "Hi, my name's Fran Racioppi. I'm a Green Beret, and I'm looking to get out. I want to come to the program." And I kind of gave this whole reason as to how I was in Africa, and I didn't expect to do this, but I really needed to be in the class. And then they said, "Oh, okay, fill out the application." And I said, "Well, I already did." And they said, "Oh, okay." And I had done everything and had already submitted it. And lo and behold, the normal class size is 60. Our class had 61. So I like to think I was the one who created the 61st spot.
Right. Well, I love that. And that's something that I want everyone that's listening to this to think about. Sometimes we make mistakes, right? We miss deadlines, but don't just be like, oh, I missed it. Call, find out, because it never hurts asking and kind of pushing and being like, hey, this is my situation. I'm not making excuses for myself, because it's very different, kind of missing it because you were, smoking weed and playing video games. But, and again, even if you were doing that and you missed it and you're like, I want to change my life, you have to think about that. And then you jumped into this MBA and, you really kind of put both feet in and really, really focused. Can you tell us when you got out of that? Because that was another part of the story that I was like, oh, yeah, this is so interesting, is the first job you got out. Because I love how, anyone that's just joining, Fran spoke about, he applied to all these different jobs. And when I'm a Green Beret, I have all these leadership, but things that, kind of translate in the business world don't translate in the military. And so he had to learn, and that's why he went and got the MBA. So when you got out, can you take us a little through that after you graduated?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate to have met a guy by the name of Rick Nelson, and Rick Nelson works at Merrill Lynch, and he was the first to expose me to this concept that now is a core tenet of the podcast and talent work group who I work with. And that's this concept of hire for character, train for skill. And so what that means is find people who have a demonstrated pattern of success in what they've done in their life. They exhibit a certain level of character, and define those character traits. What are they? We talk about 9 on the podcast, and those are the 9 that are used by Special Operations Command to assess and recruit and select talent. And then everything is based on the exhibit of various degrees of each one of those 9. But figure out what you're looking for in someone, and weight that above technical skills, especially technical skills that can be taught. If you can teach someone of high character how to do something, who has a demonstrated pattern of success other places of their life, you can really be confident that they're most likely going to succeed in what they're asking you to do, if their heart's in it. And I'll say that for a very
And I
reason.
love that. I love that so much, because, like with my dyslexia and stuff like that always, it's something that is so true. If you see something in someone, don't just assume, oh, they can't do it. And so I love that. And that was one of the things that we talked about in your podcast. And I think it's just so brilliant. So please continue.
Yeah, I mean, they'll figure it out, and you'll teach them. If you're willing to invest in the hard skills, they'll learn them. And so that's what Rick hired me at Merrill Lynch to do. And I was very fortunate, and to this day, he's one of my best friends, and we're super close. And so I worked at Merrill Lynch while I was in business school, and I was a financial advisor. And I became a registered representative, did Series 7. I sold insurance. I talked about people about investing with me, and that's a great industry. I learned a tremendous amount. But I said the phrase, if your heart's in it, for a very important reason. I have no doubt that I would have been successful had I lasted there longer than 18 months. But my heart wasn't in it. And one of the most difficult conversations that I've ever had in my life, personally or professionally, was the day I had to go in to Rick and tell him that I wasn't going to be staying past my graduation, and that I was going to be going on to go do something else, because this was the future of his business. And he really looked at the growth of his business and taking me on as a partner, and had invested a lot of time and energy and effort in developing me over a year and a half. And I just woke up every day, and I wasn't able to give 100% in my heart. And you talked about you're all in. I talked about Josh Bridges, and Josh Bridges says, if you do it to go pro. I'm a 1 or 10 person on the dial. Either I don't care or I'm all in, and there's very little in between. And I just wasn't there. I was on the one side of things. And so I had to go in and have that difficult conversation with him. And then I went, and I was the director of global security at Snapchat, which was a great opportunity and a really exciting time to be at that company shortly after they went public, and was able to professionalize and grow their global security department across the entire world. So that was really, really cool.
Yeah. And, I love what you said, because that's one of the reasons why we do get along so well, because I'm the same. I'm either a 1 or a 10. There's not a lot in between. I'm all or nothing. And I want everyone, again, to listen to that, because if you're waking up, like Fran said, he just knew he wasn't in it. And I think that's some people have that quality where they can be like, okay, I know this is going to be hard, but I know that this is not right. I know that this is not right for me. And I'm also not serving the people that have invested in me. And so I owe it to them to be like, you know what? I'm not your person, but I so appreciate you for that opportunity. And then you find what the opportunity is that you're meant to do. There's so many people, even today, that are listening to this podcast or know people that are stuck in jobs or stuck in parts of their life that they're just not happy and they're not showing up and they're not serving the people that they should be serving because they're either fearful or they don't want to hurt people's feelings or they just don't know what to do. And so I think that it's so important. That's one of the reasons why I started my whole podcast and all of these different series I have, is that I want one person to be listening to this being like, you know what? It's my time. I need to resign and I need to figure out what to do, or I need to change my life. I need to get out of this relationship, or I need to get out of this part of the world that I'm in and I need to move to a different place, because it's so important. We all just have one life. And if you're just going through the motions and you're kind of an autopilot, what kind of life is that? And we all go through periods. I'm not always woohoo like this. There's some days that I'm in autopilot, but that's we're humans. But I know when to turn that autopilot off and go into what I'm meant to be doing. So Fran, I love that you had that hard conversation, and you said if you didn't have that, your relationship with your friend, and I forget his name, I apologize, Rick, if you did not have that conversation and you stayed in that position because you were like, okay, I can make a good living, I have a wife, I have a daughter, I know I can make a good living, and I just stay there. What would have that done to the relationship with you and Rick? And what would that have done to the relationship with you and your wife that you have, now mended? Really think about that, right?
No, I think I'd be in a completely different spot.
Right.
So, I mean, it's one of those. I think it's one of those. You look back on your life and you think about decisions. Life's a lot like a football game. A Super Bowl, right? They talk about Super Bowls most often come down to like 2 or 3 critical plays, and if the play had kind of gone the other direction, it would have changed the momentum and would have possibly had a different result. That's one of those periods of time where I look back at my life, and if you could sum up, the 3 or 4 decisions you made in your life that really swung things a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of them. Yeah, for sure.
Right. I love that. So then take us then, and really, because I want to get into, I know we have like about 15 minutes. I want to get in like how you found the Jedburgh podcast, but also what you're doing now, because you have, there's been a couple of times where we've been talking, you're like, I'm in India, I'm over here. I'm like, wait, where are you now? This is so amazing. So take us through a little bit that. And I do have to pause because am I not right? I would love to hear a sound of applause of anyone that had listened from the beginning about everything that you're talking about. I mean, you would think you were like 65. You have lived a life, but you have a 2-year-old and you're in your early 40s. But that's, that's one of the things I find fascinating about you though, is that you really are like, I'm going to do what, you're looking to better your life. And that's what I think is so many people are lacking. So explain what you're doing now, and then how, the podcast came about, and some of the live events that you've been at, and all of that good stuff.
Absolutely. So I stayed at Snap for a year and a half, and had a hard lesson in corporate environment, and the fact that you can't jam change down people's throat. And so I had a difficult run in there, but learned a lot and came out a better person. And then I went and I ran a cannabis company in LA, and that was really, really cool for a Russian oligarch.
Right.
And then
wow.
when COVID started, that investment was shut down, and so unfortunately, I had to sit there at COVID, like so many people did, and said, "Who am I, and what do I want to do with my life?" Because I need to figure all this out. And our son had been born on March 17th of 2020, so in Manhattan. And we were the only people on the street, on that day. And so that was pretty crazy. And then it was a matter of figuring out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And as I sat there contemplating that, I went back to things that I truly cared about, where I had kind of started, and life comes full circle sometimes. And I said, everybody's, first I said I should write a book. And then I was like, well, I talked to a couple of people and they're like, you should think about a podcast. And I said, well, I have a lot to say. But what would I talk
Yes.
about? I have no idea. And so then I started kind of formulating what that might look like. Got involved with an organization called the Talent War Group, who's one of our sponsors and very influential, and started helping us start the Jedburgh podcast. They had written a book called The Talent War on translation of special operations mindset and special operations character into corporate organizations and other organizations. And so I was very close with them, and I went to them and I said, I want to start a podcast. It's going to be called the Jedburgh Podcast. We're going to take the Jedburghs from World War II, who were a transformative organization, who what I call visionaries, drivers of change, those dedicated to winning, had to win at all costs. And if you're not familiar with the Jedburgh and Operation Jedburgh of World War II, in May of 1943, the Allies identified that the war was all but lost. Germany had occupied France. London was under siege. And they said, we have to invade France. Normandy was the only way into France and into Operation Overlord. But they couldn't do it because Germans had superior machine guns. They had entrenched positions. So they had to create this organization. They recruited 100 people each from the French, British, and American militaries. They sent them to Jedburgh, Scotland, in the northern portion of Scotland. And they trained them in three-man teams, one American, one British, one French. Starting the night before D-Day, they parachuted them in behind enemy lines into occupied France, where they linked up with French resistance forces. They trained them, they equipped them, and then they conducted sabotage and subversion operations against German reinforcements into Normandy, creating instances where movements that should have taken the Germans 2 to 3 days were taking upwards of 3 to 4 weeks because of the work that they were doing. And that allowed enough time for the invasion forces to gain a beachhead, put enough troops onto the shore in Normandy, and eventually move into France. And the Jedburgh organization was transformative in winning the war. They were given very little guidance and they were just given a vision.
Right.
Go win at all costs. And that's what they did. And that organization went on to form the operations directorate of the CIA when World War II was over. And then in the early 50s, they were taken out of the CIA into the U.S. Army, and they became the Green Berets and the Army Special Forces. And so my lineage as a Green Beret goes back to the Jedburghs. And today I tell the story of modern day Jedburghs in business, athletics, entrepreneurism, social activism, journalism, military leaders, political leaders. No conversation that I'm not willing to have from all different industries and walks of life.
And people can hear the excitement that you have just talking about that. And I know I was so honored to be on your podcast. And we had such anyone that's just joining, Fran actually came to West Hampton Beach and we recorded live, which was really, really fun. And I think my episode was right after Newt Gingrich. And I think
so.
Yeah. And I sent it to my friend. They're like, oh, I think you're doing pretty well. I said, I think my podcast is doing pretty well. One of those things. And so, I love that you just explained all that because you could see why it made sense to be called the Jedburgh Podcast. So do you want to tell us a couple different guests? I mean, I know you've had some really, really cool guests on, and it's good. Mm-hmm. Like when people say to me, who's your favorite? I'm like, I've had 155. I can name some, experiences that I remember people talking about, but I don't have, there's no favorite because they all inspire me in such a different way every time I talk to someone that is making a change, someone that's doing something like you did, where they really have pivoted their lives into something that they've dreamed about and wanted and kind of, have gone in fearlessly, not nervous, obviously nervous. I shouldn't say that, but
I'm nervous every day.
Every day. I know. And so that's why when I said that, I was like, no, I didn't mean that. Cause we're all nervous, but we're not letting fear stop us. We're not letting fear or, okay, well, what if this doesn't work? Stop us. We're going out and doing things. And you really have done that so beautifully. So do you have any moments? I know you just came back from a live event and you've done some really cool things that, stand out in your mind.
Yeah, we've been extremely fortunate. I couldn't be more appreciative to all the support that we have. Our title sponsor is Jersey Mike's. So Peter Cancro, founder of Jersey Mike's. So I met at Merrill Lynch.
Right.
And he's very close with Rick Nelson, who I talked about. And so they actually when I started the podcast, I made the list. Who are the people I would talk to? Okay, who's in my phone? Who can I call? Who should be that first
Yep.
tranche of guests? And I called Rick and I said, hey, you think Peter will come on this podcast? I want to talk to him. Maybe he has some good ideas. And so he said, yeah, try him. And Peter was absolutely adamantly supportive of it. And so we had him on. It was like episode 2. It was really our first external guest. And then we were fortunate to just build it from there. He launched us and then has come on this year in 2022 after I went back and said, look, I told you it was going to work.
Right.
And thanked him. And then they came in as our title sponsor. And we have had, as you mentioned, Newt Gingrich. We've had NFL players. We had Austin Collie, who was an NFL wide receiver. We had Jessie Graff from American Ninja Warrior and Stunt Woman. We've had a series of Olympic medalists. We had Jevy Stone, who's an Olympic medalist in women's rowing. We have Laura Wilkinson, Olympic gold medalist in women's platform diving. We've had the former Secretary of Defense under President Trump, Chris Miller. We did a big episode on Afghanistan where we had, right at 9/11, we had an Afghan immigrant who had been evacuated out of Afghanistan. We had Chris, who served not only as the Secretary of Defense, but was in one of the first Special Forces teams into Afghanistan in 2001. And we had an organization called No One Left Behind, and 2 of their board members who were also Army veterans, and everybody shared their 9/11 story and then talked about the withdrawal out of Afghanistan. We have had General McChrystal, for those who might know General McChrystal. We've had very famous, a lot of athletes. We've had Jason Khalipa, won the CrossFit Games in 2008, started a gym franchise. I could go on. It's been a really amazing experience for us. We're starting to incorporate live events. We went to Jacksonville last month to an event called Sandlot Jackson, the first ever Go Ruck Games, and we covered that 3-day fitness festival. We did 12 episodes we recorded down there. We've launched a short form series. So our long form series releases on Thursdays. They're about 50 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on what we're talking about and who the guest is. Those release on Thursdays, and we've started releasing periodically on Mondays a short form called Jumping In. So the Jedburghs jumped into World War II. It was fast and swift, and we do a short form, 15 to 20, 25 minutes on a short form one on series of Mondays. We just today launched a conversation with the Green Beret Foundation, and that's allowing us to talk about one subject, really in depth, really quick. We did an episode with the former head of the CIA operations directorate, who had also been on episode 13 about Ukraine and Russia and the situation there.
Right.
And so we've had a lot of fun doing that. And so we're doing as many as we can in person. We are doing our live events in the back of a World War II Land Rover Discovery ambulance that was used by the British Royal Air Force. And there's a podcast studio that we built in the back of that. And so we're getting that thing out to live events. We're going to go to the Veterans Day Parade in New York City this year. And we are finalizing a number of other live events for the fall.
I love it. I mean, you guys, and you can hear the excitement that, Fran, what you're doing. It's so cool where your journey has taken you. And I have to say, Daniel in the audience said, impressive list. That I know if anyone else has a question, please, you can go to the React over here with the little hearts, and you can put a question and I can ask Fran, because I also want, in the beginning, when we started, Fran and I talked about, we're going to both be at Fest, which is in Orlando. It's a convention, a podcast convention, and we're both going to be speaking at separate times. And Fran approached me and said, hey, would you want to be my co-host? I would love to do like a live, event. I know you did it at the Super Bowl and all these different things. And I said, oh my gosh, I don't even need to know anymore. If you're doing something, I 100% will do it together, because we do. I mean, anyone that's listening to this, I feel like we're very similar. Obviously, I'm older, I'm a female, you're younger, you're a male, but we have the very same kind of worth ethic, and also the way our brains go, where we're excited. When we get excited, we get excited. And when we say we're going to do something, we are going to do something. So I would love, before we wrap up, because you did touch on this, how did you become the performance coach for the for the rowing. I mean, I love that because
Yeah.
you have your hands and feet. It's not, you just don't have 2 feet in. You have like every hand, every foot, every fiber of your hair into different things that I know, are just helping more people.
Yeah. So my day job is actually I'm the chief people officer of a company called Analytics Solutions, which is a back office outsourcing company out of Boston. We have 800 employees, and so that's my day job actually. And so right before we hopped on here, and I also run marketing. So I run marketing, I run people, and so I was having a conversation about a marketing campaign that we're about to launch before I jumped onto this. But I have been very involved with the rowing team since I graduated. Certainly, my time in the Army, I was much more distant, but since the last couple of years, I've been involved with them, and just a passion of mine to give back to the community and the next generation of leaders. And I want to see the team succeed because I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that river on the Charles River in Boston. And so I had the opportunity to speak with them, ad hoc over the last couple of years, but I've built a relationship with the coach. And this year we said, how do we develop a formal program? Because I run leadership development programs for teams, individuals, and organizations as another side business that I run under my own company. And
Right.
so we work with teams, with individuals, with corporate entities on identifying not only corporate structure, but building, we run team building events, we do coaching and mentoring. And so now we've transitioned a portion of that into development of the team and working with the team and the athletes. And plus I'm able to speak from my own experience, which has been
Right.
a really great opportunity to be able to identify with them. And then we're building our team building programs with a number of national big companies that will be published here in the next couple of weeks. So we're very excited about that as well. So
Amazing.
yeah, the days start at 4 a.m. and they end about 10 p.m.
Right. I was going to say you are. And so you probably are slightly harder working than I am. You probably didn't cut the corners in your 5 miles when you ran like I was doing, like I was doing. So please also tell everyone where they can find you. Cause I know people, and then Daniel, I'm going to ask your question in a moment, but I know there's so many people out there that are like, okay, where can I learn more about Fran and what he's doing and how can I get involved? I mean, someone might say, I have a great, guest for you to have, or I want to sponsor the Jedburgh podcast. So please, shout out. They can see in the fortune cookie, a little bit, but also give us, people that are driving that can't be reading right now.
Yeah. Guest recommendations and sponsorship are always welcome. So please, please reach out. No, you can go to www.jedburghpodcast.com. We'll get you to our site. All of our episodes are on there. Every episode has its own individual page with a full transcription and an embedded player, so you can listen to them there. And anywhere where you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get podcasts, we're most likely on there. We're on 30-something platforms. You can go to Instagram, Twitter, at Jedburgh Podcast. LinkedIn is Jedburgh Podcast, or you can find me, Fran Racioppi, on LinkedIn. All of those, Racioppi Fran on Instagram, but if you put my name in the right way, it comes up too. So yeah, follow me on all of those different platforms.
And you're also going to be on Picked Cherries soon as well.
Yeah,
right?
So we just had that conversation yesterday. So yeah, we're finalizing that, wrapping that up here this week, and then we're gonna meet with them when we're down there at Podfest and talk a little bit more about getting on that platform as well.
Yes, and Stu, who's one of the founders of Picked Cherries, actually when we're at Podfest, we're going to talk to him because he's going to be there, which will be really, really fun. Anyone that has not gone over to check out Picked Cherries, or if you're listening to this episode now or later, because it's going to go out on my RSS feeds, which will go everywhere. You can also go to Pick Cherries and get that little snippet, because there might be a snippet that you're like, oh my gosh, I want my friends, I want someone to listen to this, where you can share it. And they might say, oh, this is now, or I don't have time because I'm not as invested as my sister, my brother, whoever it is. But when you send that little clip and they get that little clip, that lights them on fire, just like an Instagram, like an IG or a short or, a reel, TikTok, this is very similar to that. And it's really exciting because then you're able to share podcasts like never before. So definitely check out Picked Cherries. And I have to say, Daniel said, what legacy do you want to leave?
That's a great question, Daniel. I've never been asked that question. The legacy that I want to leave was I a person that Okay, I'll give it to you this way, and this just came up this week. Very simply, I'll give you a short answer. I'll give you a long answer. There's a difference between being a good dude and a nice guy. And if you and I just posted about this yesterday because I had this conversation with Josh Bridges. But I want to be a good dude. There's a lot of nice guys out there, but a good dude is somebody who impacts other people and leaves organizations and people better than they were when they met them, and that's my goal. And so you don't always get it right in life, but if you're a good dude, people understand that, especially if you have the character to own up to your mistakes and make the corrections moving forward in the future. And that's something that I've strived very hard to do through the course of my life. And that's the impact and the legacy that I would like to leave for my family, my kids, and anybody who takes the time to invest in hearing what I have to say and supporting us. And we put a lot of work into that attitude, I think.
You definitely do. Thank you, Daniel, for your question as well. I mean, you definitely do. And it shows with everything that we just discussed. And I'm just happy that we connected. Funny enough, anyone that listens that knew that I had Connecticut ties, Fran actually lives in 2 towns, like over from where I lived for over 8 years, which I was like, wait, where are you? This is crazy. Now, like there's even more ties. And his daughter plays lacrosse, which we know how much I love lacrosse. So I was excited to hear that. But I just, Fran, again, thank you so much for joining YNS Live and Fireside. I mean, this is what I love about Fireside is that people on LinkedIn are listening right now. They might not know about Fireside. We're getting that out. We're, yelling from the rooftops because this is an app that's really helping change the way we share podcasts, not even just share podcasts, but we do podcasts. So I'm on right now YouTube Live, I'm on LinkedIn Live, I'm on Twitch Live, and I am on Facebook Live. And so anyone that's kind of scrolling through there during their lunch hour is able to see us and listen to our episode. But now they can also jump into Fireside because they can see and look and feel and then become a member of Fireside and then share it from here too. So it is such a great app, a great space for us to be able to share these stories and get them out to more people. So I just want to thank you so much for being a guest on YNS Live and joining. And I can't wait to see you in 4 days?
I know. Yeah, it's coming up fast. So we got some work to do between now and then. But my other 2 microphones showed up, so we have the 4 microphones set now.
I know, which is just amazing, which I mean, it's going to be fun. And we will be able to share that with you guys. You can either catch it on the Jedberg podcast or you can catch it on your next stop, which is, my main podcast. But again, thank you, Fran. And I know you have a busy day ahead of you. So good luck with everything. And I will be seeing you in a couple of days. And thank you everyone that has joined the audience and asked questions. And we will see you guys soon.
Thanks.
All right, I'm going to bring Mr. Waitbot up for a little music. Oh, we got a slow exit. we had the poke in the beginning, now we have a slow exit. Thank you, everyone. Daniel, Cindy, Dale, Fi, Dave, Gina, Alicia, and everyone else that came jumping in. I saw a bunch of people jumping in and out, and everyone that is on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. We will see you guys next week for another episode, YNS Live with NFL Thread.